New. Query. Definition. Serial. Enter. Serial. Adjective. In. Computing. A device involving the transfer of data as single sequence bits. New. Query. Definition. Surreal. Enter. Adjective. Bizarre. Dreamlike. Hallucinatory. Unbelievable. Irrational. New. Query. Surreal. Experiments. Lain. Meaning. Enter.
On November 7th, 2021, I was browsing Facebook looking through the Serial Experiments Lain Wired posting group when I noticed a recent post. The image can be summed up as follows. If an old person says technology is bad, they're a boomer and they should shut up. But if Serial Experiments Lain says that technology is bad, that's some incredibly insightful commentary, and above the photo was the caption, me. Then came the comments. I'm gonna take the bait and just say, boomers say technology bad as a blanket statement, and often for the wrong reasons, but Serial Experiments Lain goes into the reasons why the internet can ultimately be used for bad, and sends a message that we need to keep that from happening to us. I do not agree. Technology is not bad. Big corporations are the cancer of this world. Technology can be a good thing when implemented in the right way. Us. Yes. A good meme, but in reality, Lain's message is not that simple. I think it has a similar message as Evangelion. Not really connected to technology. Technology is bad. For real, it's not a joke. Look at humanity now. Look at humanity 2,000 years ago. The world was never a good place since the start, but it's getting even worse now. Is it? By what standard? I don't think you understand the point of Lain. Even among people who like Lain enough to be part of a Facebook fan group, there's significant disagreement about what the show really means. And you can see this also in how people talk about the series online everywhere else. Forum posts, blog posts, scholarly articles, all espousing different interpretations of Serial Experiments Lain. But I want to focus on just a slice of this discourse, how people have found meaning in Serial Experiments Lain on good old YouTube.com. I watched 18 videos explaining what Serial Experiments Lain means, and for the most part, their interpretations fall into three approaches. Some view Lain as a commentary about technology, others see it as a meditation on existence, and a smaller group has focused on primarily its aesthetics. Now, I'm not going to be talking about every video involving Serial Experiments Lain on YouTube, and if I don't talk about one that you happen to really like, or maybe even one that you made, it doesn't mean I dislike that video. This isn't a list of videos I like or dislike. This isn't a list of videos I think are even right or wrong, and if you really are interested in Serial Experiments Lain, I would encourage you to watch each of these videos on your own and form your own opinions. Furthermore, this is going to follow the format of a literature review, and I'm going in with three guiding questions. Number one, I want to know, how do people find meaning in Serial Experiments Lain? Number two, what does that meaning that they found say about the show? And three, when I look at all this in totality, what does it say about us, the fans of Lain?
Technology. Approach. 0, 1.
Serial Experiments Lain came out during a rather weird transition period of the late 90s. It was a time where it felt like anything was still possible. The internet was new and mysterious. Lain was one of many stories at the time trying to address how rapidly technology was changing, and it also tried to articulate what that could possibly lead to. Criticalism, through the official Anime News Network channel, opens their video with a brief overview of technological advances, particularly within the context of the 1990s. They examine the character of Lain as an allegory for the internet itself, how her room transforms from a normal adolescent's room to the literal inside of a computer, how each episode, called a layer by the show, reveals another layer of the potential effect the internet could have on humanity. Throughout the series, we see at least three different sides of Lain. In the physical world, she's shy, quiet, and withdrawn. But her online form, the Lain of the Wired, is known to be aggressive, brash, the kind of girl who takes what she wants. And Criticalism compares that aspect of Lain's character to how people assume different identities when they post online. Someone who is shy and introverted in person could be loud and extroverted online. Under the Scope, in their review for the series, argues,
"The mere fact that Lain is still so talked about today, almost 2 decades after its release, is a testament to just how transcendental the series was and is. Part of the reason for all that discussion is people still haven't completely figured out what Lain's actually about, and no, I'm only half joking. It's a truly remarkable series I guarantee will make you think, like few others have. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is up to you, but that's the point."
Their analysis hinges on an assumption that the show ultimately makes sense. But you do have to put work in, and you will get whatever you put in. If you put in 100% of your attention, you will be able to understand it. At the top of the list of themes they see in the work is what they refer to as a, quote, harrowing and prophetic message about technology. That Lain as a series really articulated how the lines between what is virtual and what is real were already starting to blur, even back in 1998. Shadow ACS compares the series to David Lynch's 1977 surrealist film Eraserhead, saying,
"It actually reminded me a lot of the movie Eraserhead, and how the whole thing is just crazy, disturbing visuals and atmosphere that loosely string together a story."
And they note how the series, at the very least, plays with uncommon ideas, like the show's saying maybe we should give in to sci-fi taking us all over. Maybe it would be a good thing if technology replaced humanity. While Shadow ACS, in passing, says that the series toys with these ideas, never fully committing, Nezumi VA argues that we really can't talk about Serial Experiments Lain without talking about transhumanism, which, funnily enough, I don't think any of the other videos I watched actually mentioned by name. Nezumi VA posits that the anime is not clearly on the side of transhumanism, and that its thematic legacy has been somewhat misconstrued. They point to Alice's actions in the last 2 episodes, how she shows Lain there's value in having a human body, so you could connect with people physically, with love, choice, and free will. Furthermore, they argue that Lain at the end of the series has become a kind of intermediary barrier in order to prevent the physical world and the wired from ever merging again. Referring to Lain herself, they explain,
"Once built to crumble the barrier between worlds, now an enforcer of order to ensure that the two never cease being separate constructs, with the wired acting, as our internet does, as an extension but not a direct continuation of the world itself. A tool for communication, but not an outright replacement."
2 more things on the Nezumi VA video that I think are worth highlighting. First, they pull up this rather revealing quote by the Lain producer Yasuyuki Ueda, wherein he says it's actually a good thing kids are on the internet so much more often now, because, as Ueda puts it, they get more information and they learn more, which backs up Nezumi VA's overall claim that Lain is not a condemnation of the internet, but it's also not an embrace of transhumanism. And second, they made a really cool point about how the B in the end title card "To Be Continued" is a direct reference to the 1990s tech company B. I don't have much to say about that, other than that it's neat. And last, for Team Technology, there's Nietzsche. They also discuss a quote from producer Ueda, but this time, Ueda is commenting about how Lain was actually meant to be a confrontation against American culture. And not only that, specifically against the type of influence America has had over Japan since World War II. Nietzsche's video is pretty unique in that it hones in on something I frankly hadn't thought much about before, and that's the constant usage of the English language in Lain. From the show's English language opening song, to the opening title cards, to all of the on-screen text walls that are consistently in English. Nietzsche views Lain as a conspiracy theory anime, and a very good one at that. For Nietzsche, part of what often gets overlooked is how much the English language and American culture ends up getting proliferated through the internet, and how that results in further global domination. So while most of the essayists on YouTube would agree that Lain is at least in some part a commentary on technology, it's still really in contention as to what the series is arguing for or against. Like, does the series embrace the internet as progress and evolution? Or is the series a warning against how technology could erase cultures or cause us to lose ourselves? And it's this idea of losing ourselves that has captivated so many Lain fans. Because for as much as Lain potentially has to say about technology, the series may have even more to say about existence and reality.
Existence approach 02.
So it turns out that a lot of people want to talk about existentialism when it comes to Lain. This was the most common approach to Lain analysis that I found on YouTube, so I'm going to go real quick through a lot of big ideas. Again, I would recommend checking the full videos out for yourself sometime. With that said, first up is Sock Sensei. At the start of their aptly titled Reality Serial Experiments Lain Analysis, they refer to how the night they checked out the show was one of the strangest nights of their life. In their own words,
Serial Experiments Lain can be summed up as a series of mind trips that make you question the very meaning of life, what creates and makes up reality, and the meaning of everything, or lack thereof. After viewing this, I can say without a single doubt in my mind that everyone should experience the show at least once, even if you're not into anime. I've never watched, read, or consumed any type of media that made you contemplate this many existential questions in such a compact and entertaining way.
The show brought to their mind the idea of solipsism, that the only thing you can know for sure is real is your own mind, and anything outside of your own mind is questionable at best. Along those same notes, Akumeragon brings up how in the series, people only exist in the memories of others. They bring up Plato and Socrates and their forms of essentialism, versus, in stark contrast, Friedrich Nietzsche and existentialism. Akumeragon ultimately views Lain's choice to erase herself at the end as a form of suicide, but a positive sacrifice, because it meant that she could create her own meaning for existence by seeing the best in humanity. Echoing Sock Sensei and Akumeragon is the anime philosopher, who also discusses the relationship between memory and existence. For the anime philosopher, it all boils down to the ideas of George Berkeley and Julien Offray de la Mettrie. Without anyone believing in Lain, she simply wouldn't exist. What isn't remembered never happened. And as the series states, memory is merely a record that can be rewritten. Furthermore, human bodies are themselves machines. While this essayist remarks that it's sad the show's creators never revealed exactly what position they take or what position the show takes, the anime philosopher interprets it as being more on the side of existentialism rather than essentialism. So far, that is 3 videos that are mostly in accord. To them, Lain is a series that affirms free will. People don't have a meaning to their lives that's preordained, but we can make a meaning for ourselves. That said, not all choices are equally fulfilling. Unknown Layers compares Serial Experiments Lain to the philosophy of Jean-Paul Sartre, particularly with regards to the idea of bad faith. Basically, every day people play roles in society, and when we play a role that's artificial to us, we live inauthentically and are acting as an object, essentially. So the goal of life, then, is to live authentically by being yourself. And Unknown Layers sees this in Lain too. Lain's personalities play various roles. There's the Lain that is the angel of the wired, Lain, the quiet student at school, as well as Lain, the partier at Siberia. Lain was a program before she was a person. Her essence precedes her existence. She was a planned tool, like a scissor made specifically for the purpose of cutting paper. In that way, she must embody essentialism, right? But then Lain realizes she's a program, and as everything about her old way of life starts falling apart, she's able to get help from Alice. And with Alice's help, Lain can start making her own choices. Lain essentially upends her own programming. and starts to define her own new purpose. For something a little different, we have Crabe's analysis of eyes in Serial Experiments Lain. Crabe highlights how character expressions are often quite hard to read in the series, so a lot of information is actually communicated by their eyes. Eyes indicate perception, and in Lain, perception is reality. Crabe points out how Lain's eyes are different from other people's. She has these tiny pinpoint pupils. Her eyes clue us in that she's different, how her perception is different, and correspondingly, how her reality is different. Crabe also discusses the concept of ego death, as it pertains to both Buddhism and psychedelic drugs. And this ties in really nicely to what Sarah McPhee has to say about both Lain and Neon Genesis Evangelion. Both anime are from the late 90s, and both are experimental. But they see the connection as going deeper than that. Both are also trying to parse out similar questions about the self. In Lain and in Evangelion, people feel separated from others. Both evoke feelings of loneliness, even suffering from being misunderstood or ignored by others. Lain and Shinji have emotionally distant fathers. In both anime, physical relationships are not fulfilling characters' emotional needs. And in both series, people feel separated from reality and new technology. Sarah McPhee compares how both the Navi computers and the Ava mechs act as ways for their protagonists to control their lives, but in both stories, those same technologies also make them lose control over their lives and shift them toward chaos. Sarah McPhee probably mentioned this in their video too, but in both series, a character is working behind the scenes to merge everyone into a universal consciousness. Both Gendo's Human Instrumentality Project and Masami Eri's Protocol 7 are rejected by the protagonists at the end, and ultimately Lain and Shinji choose to preserve humanity, even with all their physical imperfections. Lastly, there's CJ Kalla and Max Durat, who each apply the ideas of Carl Jung to Serial Experiments Lain. CJ Kalla hones in on Layer 9, the episode titled Protocol, and in particular what is said about the Schumann resonance. CJ Kalla stipulates that the Wired is like dreaming, as both are in this realm of the unconscious mind communicating with the conscious mind, and Lain's multiple selves, to Kalla, are like the shadow and the anima animus. They explain that as Lain forms and disintegrates her various identities, she gradually comes to terms more with herself and the warring aspects of her identity. Eventually, she's able to reintegrate those different parts of her, become whole, and in doing so, become almost like a divine god. It is this godhood that interests Max Durat. In their video titled The Secret to Becoming a God in Serial Experiments Lain, for Max Durat, the Wired is the digital version of Jung's collective unconscious, and when Masami Eri matched it up to the frequency of the Schumann resonance, he was able to link everyone wirelessly, without hardware, to a hive mind network. But Lain herself rejects this hive mind and instead celebrates human mortality and imperfection. Max Durat sees Lain the character as an AI program who had wanted a body and an ego. She had her own memories wiped and became the human girl, Lain Iwakura. If Masami Eri and his knights could get Lain to die, it would be to their advantage. But Lain rejected suicide and mocked Eri for how he had so casually dismissed the importance of a flesh and blood body. As Max Durat puts it,
Lain exalts the human condition. Though the possession of a body brings suffering, mortality, and ignorance, it is also what allows us to experience reality in the keenest possible way.
Oh, and something to put a pin in for later. When the anime alludes to this notion that Masami Eri's ideas weren't his own, that they had in some way been implanted into him, Max Durat argues that it's Lain who had those ideas first, that she's the origin of those ideas. Nothing I want to say about that now, but, later.
Sorry, didn't realize anyone was here. Yep.
aesthetic approach. 03.
All of these ideas about existentialism, essentialism, reality and memory, Sartre and Nietzsche and Jung, they can be really fascinating. But they can also be very overwhelming. And you could even argue that this isn't even all the show has to offer. So while I saw fewer people take this third approach, my heart really goes out to them, to these people who love Lain mainly on an aesthetic level. While, yes, someone who's on the technology or existence side may very well bring up something involving Lain's aesthetic that backs up their point of view, like how Crabe brought up eyes to talk about perception, there's still a group of Lain fans who look at style for style's sake. In their video, Serial Experiments Lain is what my mind looks like, I think Core really taps into why I first fell in love with Lain. Core writes that up until recently, they would have said characters are their favorite part of a story, but for them, recently it had shifted more toward the aesthetic experience of a work. Core argues that Lain isn't loved to this day just because of its story and themes. If these themes were played straight, as Core sees it, the show wouldn't have the fandom that it has. Rather, a big part of the show's appeal is that it's unique in how it looks and how it sounds. Core recommends that people watching Lain for the first time just watch it, and as they put it, embrace the bizarre. Core says you shouldn't ask questions. The show communicates moods of mania and melancholy, loneliness and claustrophobia, and for your first time viewing, you don't need to quote-unquote understand Lain's plot to feel that. In their review for the anime, Tyranno admits that they didn't get the show, but they still would rank it high because they're so enamored with the show's aesthetic. Tyranno praises how the show's slow pace, tone and imagery, and sound design all combine to make something that feels distinctly art house. Tyranno clearly loves the humming of the wires. And I mean, come on, who doesn't? And speaking of people who love the show's audio, there's RC Anime, who made a whole video about the sound design in Serial Experiments Lain. RC Anime argues that most of the story's drama is invoked by what we hear. The show will remove background tracks to emphasize sounds, like the dad typing loudly on his keyboard as he ignores his child, or there'll be a trance-like quiet that gets interrupted suddenly by a loud noise that draws your attention. Also, kinda random, but RC Anime makes this great point about Layer 5. That's the episode where everything goes crazy with Lain's sister. Well, there's this dialogue that Mika says earlier on that later gets flipped, and I never noticed that. And it personally sent my mind reeling with possibilities. Like, this is the kind of stuff you can notice when you're this specific about sound design. It's great. Similar to how Crabe earlier had talked about eyes, RC Anime also discusses how sound is used to emphasize differences in perception. With Lain, we're not always sure if the things that she's hearing can be heard by anyone else. And over the course of the show, we learn that none of the characters are reliable perspectives, because they're all experiencing their own weird realities. And the language through which we come to understand this is the language of sound design. I mentioned at the start that I had 3 guiding questions for this literature review, and I think we're at the point where I can now reevaluate those. First, how do people find meaning in Serial Experiments Lain? Well, it turns out in a lot of ways. These 3 approaches I put forward are kind of arbitrary. Maybe you noticed that. See, there's a lot of overlap, and I don't think that any of these 18 videos I've talked about fall into only one of the 3 categories. They all overlap. People in general have talked about Lain with regards to technology, existence, and aesthetics, but within those 3 categories, there is so much debate about what it's saying about technology, about what it's saying about existence, and whether or not any of those ideas are more important or more developed than simply the series' distinct visual and audio style. My second question was, what does that say about the show? That's the discourse we've been having. Well, I think the differing opinions all over YouTube emphasize how open to interpretation Serial Experiments Lain really is. That even after 20 years have passed, people are still trying to wrap their heads about what it's about. A lot of really smart people disagree on important topics with Lain, but I think all of these different answers also illustrate that you shouldn't feel bad if you don't feel like you get it. Everyone is flailing around with all their different kinds of points of view, so I don't think there's this secret answer you have to love Lain. And then my third question was, what does that say about us? This is a question I personally find very interesting, but I also want to be careful, because I don't want to overstep and make assumptions about any of the people in these videos I've discussed. Ultimately, I don't know these people any more than you know me. But generally, through watching these videos, it struck me how people get drawn to the series in some rather specific ways. Some people are sucked into it because they feel a need to understand it. So that central mystery is kind of like the light that attracts the moth, right? While other people openly admit they don't have a clue about it, and maybe they love it because they don't get it. It's a never-ending mystery, and they love that it's never-ending. There's a kind of special joy that can happen when you're face-to-face with a piece of storytelling or art that's bigger than you are, or seemingly smarter than you are. More than one of those 18 videos mention David Lynch by name, and I think his movies, alongside Twin Peaks, hold a very similar appeal for people. Fans can get sucked into things like Lost or Evangelion because it's something so unfamiliar, yet also something they can personally relate to. And I think whichever approach you take, you can find something to love about Lain. Now, before I hit you with my own new approach, I want to mention two videos that I couldn't quite place into any of those three approaches, but are like super big deals when it comes to Lain analysis on YouTube. Those two videos are Scapadoa's video from 2018, which is one of, if not the most viewed Lain analysis video, and the other is Anime Archaeology's 2012 video, which is one of the oldest Lain analysis videos, and it still really holds up. Both of these videos are slow, thorough explanations of the series that have the goal of being more objective and simplifying the confusion. I am not generally giving my opinions on the videos I've been discussing, but I do want to say that these are two solid choices if you're looking for a place to start when it comes to comprehending the story of Lain a bit better. Between Scapadoa and Anime Archaeology, I got a better sense of how the ideas of id, ego, and superego fit into Lain, as well as how the human genome, kids, knights, and Siberia might fit also into the overall story. But there's just this thing. There's this moment. There's something Anime Archaeology said that I have to bring up right here, right now. At the very end of their video, they say,
"Oh, and all the stuff about aliens, total red herring."
But what if I were to, boldly, and likely in total error, say unto you, unto Anime Archaeology and all of the others?
Wrong!
Alien approach 04.
So, way before I started the literature review part of this video, like a year ago, my original idea for the Lain video was actually to talk about this. And I want to preface right away, before I get elbow deep in this desperate grasping of straws, that I myself think this theory is silly. It's a silly thing to believe, right? That the aliens are not, in fact, a red herring, that the aliens are rather actually extremely powerful in the story. Like, I'm arguing that the aliens are actually in control of everything up until the last episode. And that's very silly. But if you end up convinced of my nonsense, fear not. This theory is perfectly compatible with every other video and every other theory I've been talking about, because it actually changes almost nothing. So, everything begins with Layer 9, the episode Protocol, the same one that CJ Kalla brought up a lot in their video. See, Protocol, if you're not aware of it, is an info dump episode, And this info is communicated mainly through scenes that cut from the animation to talk about conspiracy theories that have been mixed in with real history. The episode opens up really out of nowhere with a recounting of the Roswell, New Mexico incident, and how it's unknown what was found, if anything. And then the episode just moves on again from Roswell, and it's never directly brought up again. But the other info dump moments continue a linear progression of ideas, from the MJ-12 document and Vannevar Bush, to research into the Schumann resonance, to the modern advent of the internet, to Masami Eri's experiments with Protocol 7. And the implication I get from this is that it is a linear chronological progression, that these ideas can be traced in order as one thing leads to another. And that would mean that it all ended with Masami Eri, but it began with Roswell, New Mexico. Now, after the Roswell opening, and before the next cutaway, we see Lain in her room, just chillin', when the door opens up and she turns toward what appears to be a gray man-type alien wearing a Freddy Krueger shirt. And look at this weird dude. Like, he just smiles at Lain and vanishes. And that's it. Aside from a flashback moment and a semi-recap episode later, that is the first and last time we see the alien. Except it kind of isn't. See, when Lain is at Alice's door in a later episode, she looks just like the alien with her body, but at the top there's a Lain head. Real talk, I fully believe in my heart of hearts that the only reason this alien stuff started in the first place is because the creators thought it'd be a funny pun. You know, to have aliens in the Lain show. aLain, alien. I mean, if you're doubting me, these are also the same people who put the joke about, have you ever seen the Lain? Honestly, seems like the same kind of sense of humor to me. But I can't shake that it might be more than just a jokey pun. I agree with Shadow ACS that Lain is like a David Lynch work. Lynch and Lain both jolt you with weird images, but I don't believe in either case it's ever just weird for the sake of being weird. The weird is always communicating something. Remember that pin from earlier? There's that part near the end of the series where Lain implies that Masami Eri didn't come up with the plan on his own, and that's where Max Darrot had argued that it's Lain that gives him the ideas. But, I actually think it's the aliens. Going back to Protocol, the aliens were the first ones in that timeline, the one that leads all the way at the end to Masami Eri. I think the aliens did arrive on Earth, and that in Roswell, they began their plan. They purposefully led humans to advance their technology and the internet, and that their goal was to get everything to where it is in the series. But why would the aliens want that? As the anime philosopher had put it, humans are machines. And if humans are machines, we could be used as machines, by someone from the outside, a user. And I think the requirement for that to happen is something Crabe had brought up: ego death. If the ego, the self, is vacant within an individual body, it would allow the aliens to operate the empty vessel as they please. And this could go a long way to explain one of the series' weirder moments. What happened to Mika in the 5th episode? When Mika arrives home near the end of the episode, she sees across from her what appears to be another Mika. And no sooner after, when Lain looks back at the sister who had just entered through the door, there's this freaky ghost thing there instead of her sister at the door. This really boggled my brain for a while. But I now think this is the moment where Mika's ego, or self, has left her body. It's her soul, her essence, whatever you want to call it, that's been left behind. So for the rest of the series, when we see Mika, we're just seeing a body that no longer has that human consciousness in it. The original Mika might have been erased. Maybe she's in the virtual world. But either way, her body remains open to the influences of the Wired. And to the aliens. Max Darrot pointed out that Lain herself rejects the hive mind that Masami Eri was proposing, and I think it's that hive mind that the aliens wanted. If everyone's individual consciousness, was linked to a collective consciousness and pooled together, there would then be a network of human vessels opened for manipulation, and thus the hum of the wires, which Tyranno had brought up, can be an ever-constant reminder of the silent hum of the Schumann resonance, which Masami Eri's Protocol 7 had linked to the wired in order to connect everyone's minds and make the body extraneous. I propose that the aliens had been orchestrating all of this since the late 40s, and they wanted Masami Eri to falsely believe the body was useless, not because it actually is, but because the aliens wanted the empty bodies for themselves. The only problem is they were not able to convince Lain of that. Lain was not willing to kill herself. In their analysis video, Skepadoa lists the different versions of Lain that appear in the series, and at the end of that section, they say,
I think the only possible spot left for another Lain would be the apparition of Lain in the coloured sundress that appears near the end. Personally, I think that dress looks more of a turquoise, but I can see how it might be taken as blue. However, I've always interpreted it to be that the sundress Lain is just a representation of Lain's subconscious desires, and not necessarily a unique personality like the other three.
I agree here that sundress Lain is not an alternate form of Lain the same way that Lain of the Wired is. And I do think it really could just be her unconscious thoughts. But I also think it's possible, and we should discuss it, that this sundress Lain may be a representation of what the aliens want. The sundress Lain wants Lain to become a god, and you could argue that that's basically what Lain does decide to do in the end, when she becomes an unaging, silent observer of the world. But Lain had emphatically disagreed with sundress Lain. If they both essentially wanted the same thing, for Lain to become a god, why would this happen? I think it's because there is an important difference. The sundress Lain had still wanted Lain to die. This time, not by physical suicide, that plan had failed multiple times, but instead by a purposeful ego death. I think that sundress Lain wanted Lain to erase her individual consciousness and become a god in the sense of no longer being a human with a human self. Sundress Lain poked and prodded at Lain's feelings of loneliness and teased the idea of just, resetting everything and this time making it so she couldn't feel lonely anymore. And I think the only way a human consciousness could never be lonely again, in Lain's situation, is simply by not being the kind of entity that feels loneliness anymore, by erasing her own humanity and ego. Notably, when Lain shuts out the sundress Lain, it freezes up and glitches out of existence. And I think this is the exact moment where the aliens failed their mission. They were 99% of the way there. All they needed to do was get Lain to bend to their will. But Lain fought back with a will of her own. There's also these weird electrical towers that Lain sees, and I'm just going to call it a premonition. They're so bizarre that even Lain, a character who normally reacts to everything around her with a sort of blasé, sort of reaction, even Lain asks what those are. And I think these dystopian apocalyptic towers are a vision, a premonition of what the aliens would have turned Earth into. We even see the same towers placed over the real-world cities in our present day, present time. That's the bulk of my aLain theory. Like I said, it doesn't go against the show's themes of technology or existence, and it doesn't go against liking the show primarily for its aesthetic. Heck, if you want to stretch things a bit, you could even argue that the unknown voice at the end of episode 12 might be an Aliens, or, again, a representation of the aliens.
Oh, okay, so that's how it works. I had no idea the world was this simple to figure out. I was overthinking things all along. I always thought the world was such a big, scary place to live in, with no place to hide. But no, once you figure it out, it's all so easy.
See, I told you it would be.
It would make sense that the voice would want to prod Lain in this direction of the easy path. And hey, you could even argue that Nietzsche's ideas fit into this. You could interpret the aliens as an elaborate metaphor for the American influence on Japan. They literally are the invading aliens the foreign entity that is trying to control everyone through a hive mind hegemony of the internet. I don't personally believe that one was intentional, but that's the ambiguity of Lain, and it's beautiful. Ultimately, Lain is a show with a god in the machine, a literal deus ex machina, where a gray man alien shows up out of nowhere, and the series goes out of its way to make a "have you seen the Lain" joke. I don't think you have to take everything too seriously. And almost every one of those 18 videos I mentioned specifically brought up that there isn't one correct way to interpret Serial Experiments Lain. So I implore you to explore your own feelings and find your own meanings as you dive into the layers of the series and all of the insightful videos about Lain on YouTube.com. Let's all love Lain. Let's all love Lain in our own unique way. And let's never stop talking about it. This video was made for the November 2021 Anime YouTube Challenge, hosted by Pause and Select. The theme this year was Literature Review. You should check out Pause and Select and their channel. They're really smart and good videos. Also check out other people who made videos for the November Anime Challenge, also known as Novid. Special thanks again to all the channels I've featured here today for making content and putting their ideas out there for the whole internets to enjoy. I have a list of the people. These are the channels: Anime News Network, Under the Scope, Shadow ACS, Zumi VA, Nietzsche, Suck Sensei, Hakamaragon, Anime Philosopher, Unknown Layers, Crabe, Sarah McPhee, CJ Kala, Exterot, Core, Durano, RC Anime, Scapadoa, Anime Archaeology. Links to their videos are in the description. I hope I didn't mispronounce any of your names or misconstrue any of your ideas. If you like this kind of video, we have other stuff on our channel you might like. For example, I made a video on Poppy, and she's kind of like Lain, but makes music. And then also, I made a video about a manga called Kawaii the Purple, which is kind of like Lain. We're also doing a series on Revolutionary Girl Utena, which is also a late 90s anime, and it's also really weird and confusing. And then we also do a Twin Peaks and David Lynch podcast. Thanks again for watching. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and smash that beep, beep, ah.
Is that about 30 seconds? Let's say it's about 30 seconds.